Okay.
So we can take some questions for Dr. Sinha. Yeah, so please have a seat.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very good presentation. My question is very specific. My name is Venkatakesavan. And you said in part of your presentation, there are hundreds of players who are available in the market with cloud computing solutions.
Yes.
On a lighter vein, there are some clouds, they are like passing clouds. Companies are coming and going. How to trust them? And what should be the criteria for anyone to pick up such companies?
Yes.
And recommending it to our company's management.
That's why I just told you that why those cloud services also should be audited, because as audit, they will say how much they have administrative or financial muscle, okay, so that they can say. And yesterday in the workshop, David informed, and others also, that usually you do certification X year, let's presume, then do surveillance auditing every 18 months, and perhaps 3 years later, you again do that. So that issue which you are saying is only the auditor-wise, or unless until that cloud also says that I am keeping this data at another organization things, because organizational failure issue is there, okay, like that. So.
Any more questions? Okay, then let's give him a round of applause. I request Dr. David to kindly present the conference memento and honor Dr. Sinha. Where is where is the photographer? I would just request you to hold it for a moment. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I request David and Dr. Sinha to remain on the dais, because we will be starting the concluding panel discussion for the day. So the topic of the panel is envisaging the national digital preservation infrastructure for India, and this panel will be moderated by Dr. Mukul Sinha, and we have several eminent panelists who will contribute in the discussion. So we have Dr. Gautam Bose, Mr. Anil Johri, who is Dr. Gautam Bose he was former Deputy Director General of NIC and the chairman of the expert committee which formulated the digital preservation standards. Mr. Anil Johri is Chief Executive Officer of National Accreditation Board for certification bodies. Mr. Jamie Shears, Data Management Group CERN. Ms. Natasha Milik-Freling, Principal Researcher, Microsoft, Dr. Shirley Crompton, and Dr. David. So with this, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Sinha. This mic is working. Okay.
This is basically, we are, up till now we got most of the experience of European and American thing, but as I told you, in India, we are slightly not that much advanced, and we are trying to catch up, okay? So, the immediate question which we as a nation are facing, and most of the government people, okay, that how to go about trusted digital repository so far as India is concerned, kind of thing. So this is in our aim. And first I will request Dr. Gautam Bose, because he has been inside the government and also closely associated with e-governance kind of things, will briefly tell the history, maybe in 5 to 7 minutes, okay? Just to tell where we have today reached. Dinesh told you also that thing, but it's important for him. I will try to take no time, but as you like it, as you like it.
No, I have no slides.
Oh, so you speak as, so you are free to use either slide or.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sinha, and thanks to the organizers of the conference, specifically Mr. Dinesh Katre, that with whom that we had been long associated. As Dr. Sinha has been telling, that there had been a the road which we traveled and where we are now, and there is a road ahead of us, specifically as far as the digital preservation is concerned is in India. I'll go back to some time around 2007, where National Digital Preservation Program, a workshop was held, which was a brainstorming session, where large number of stakeholders, because if you had seen the Dr. Dinesh Katre's slide, he listed out that who were there, in that particular workshop. That, consisted of the people who have objects in the audio, video, museum objects, manuscripts, files like or archival files like National Archives of India, legal documents like Supreme Court, old books like the libraries, you have the photographs, that of the Government of India, you have the photo division of Government of India who had large number of photographs from the, the British time onwards, maps, etc. And then we deliberated upon on that particular aspect that, that we want to preserve. Further, in that particular meeting also, that there were experts who also talked of the, the material which were getting born digital, because the e-governance was, the NEGP program, National E-Governance Program was in full swing, slowly, the taking up shape in India, and large number of, the projects in the under the NEGP was doing, and they were getting born digital. Initially, that what was understood that, there are large number of formats, there are a variety of objects and artifacts, there are various type of medias, and that requires to be digitized, and that requires, if we start digitizing this, so, that then what should be, what should be the processes, what should be the media, what should be the formats, that must be, that deliberated and standardized, and at least, the noted down. So there is standardization of the processes, standardization of the equipment for the digitization, standardization of the formats, and the creation of the, the metadata, like, that if you are digitizing something, and then you must know that where from it came, what was the source, how old it is. There are a large number of metadata so that you can later on retrieve them. And then it came further, that we must know that where and what to store. What should be digitized in an organization. And as that the various, the government processes was in that, basically I am trying to talk about that was basically a government scenario on which this particular, the brainstorming was done. Then that is what, that the Dinesh told in the early morning that, the Dr. Dinesh Katre, that CDAC was requested that can they write a report, that what should be done. And then there was subsequently an Indo-US workshop around 2009, I understand, if I remember it correct. And then around 2010 or so, a report came, it was published, that what should be, done. What should be, that at least a starting point. And subsequently, a Center of Excellence funded by the DIT, Department of Electronics and Information Technology, was done. And, initially it was thought that, that probably it may be very difficult for us to take up all the, the type of the objects, all the type of the formats, etc. Let us try to concentrate on the born digital. And that is what, the standards were, that I was lucky to be the chairman of that particular committee which was the publishing of the standards very recently, and it was accepted by the Government of India and has been published as a standard. And then out of that, the various documents, it was best practices and the various standards which should be adopted was adopted. So that is what the story is about what we are today. Subsequently, that it was also, that where today's the theme session of this panel is the digital preservation infrastructure. Once we get digitized, then where do we store them? We have heard since morning, that there are various, the clouds and other type of medias. The cloud is a recent phenomena. In our scenario in India, we have the large number of national data centers, which is also again, is a government project in the, the NICNet, they call it the National Informatics Center Network, which provides the government services, and we have the national data centers and the DR centers created in India. Then we have also the state data centers. Every state of India, all the 35 states and union territories have their own data centers, which are again connected with each other with the national data center, so that they can fall back on each other. Some of them are still to be connected, but that's in the process. Finally, they will become an integrated network. Then we have the state, that how, that there is an accessing of the data. There is a network access which is required. So the NICNet provides the national and also to the states and to the district administration the network services of the government. And then on top of it, we have the state wide area network, which also gets integrated, through which, that you can access the information. And then, just now, you have heard that, the Meghraj as a cloud was also, that inaugurated yesterday. So the cloud is a service where, we are providing the hardware as a service. Already the Government of India is providing some of them as the hardware and the software as a service. In the morning, the session, I heard that somebody mentioning it at that, that the preservation as a service. I think that's a very good idea, and that should be taken further forward. The preservation as a service also should be taken into the cloud. Because the preservation has certain other aspects. There is a, the pre-preservation, the aspects which has to be, that understood, and then it has to be finally stored into the cloud. So these things must be, that looked into it. And they must be, the further worked on, that as a sequel, as a subsequent, the development where we are as on today after this workshop. So there has to be, that as far as the road ahead is concerned, there we in the morning also the Secretary Deity mentioned that we must work towards the policy for the digital preservation. Mr. Dr. Dinesh Katre also mentioned about it. So we must have the policy for the digital preservation, and also, that it must get properly dovetailed with our IT Act, Information Technology Act. So that it becomes mandatory that, that after a certain time, that some of the government records and other records, I think that got stopped. Yeah. So that must be properly dovetailed.
You are pressing this.
Oh. So I think that, that already a draft, the digital preservation policy, is already drafted and is being submitted and under consideration of the government. And then we must also work towards the standards for the non-digital born objects. That the that some of them are digitally born, some of them are, getting converted into the digital objects. We have to work toward the standards for those also. Then after that also the certification agency, that there has to be a trusted agency that where it has to be, stored. But even the content which gets deposited into that, but these repositories, they must get, that certified that yes, they are, that as far the standards is concerned, they follow the digital conservation standards. So these, the standards processes, standard institutions, then also accordingly the awareness capacity building also should get created. These are some of the the issues which must be pondered on and must be recorded and further worked on. Thank you very much.
Now I will request I'll request JB on the CERN, because he is the maximum experience of large amount of data. In the audience, we are not having that, except one gentleman, okay, Mr. Rao. But in India, in space agencies and atomic energy and n number of weather agencies, they are having their own data and they are maintaining, okay. But whether that are digital preservable or not, I myself don't know. So, in that context, I will like, apart from your experience-wise, and then what kind of opinion or suggestions or guideline you can help us. Okay.
Okay, thank you. As I have a presentation tomorrow morning, I don't want to repeat what I plan to say there. What I believe we do know quite a lot about in high-energy physics is how to store, manage, and process large volumes of data. And I say high-energy physics and not CERN because we do this in a distributed fashion all around the world, including at 2 sites in India who are tier 2 sites in Mumbai and Calcutta.
Right. Yeah.
Now, today we have about 100 petabytes of data, and we foresee maybe 5 exabytes. And these numbers might seem very big to you today, but if you start thinking of all the digital records, health records, private records, everything else that could be, multiplied by the number of people you have in India, in the world, you can very easily get to very large numbers. And a lot of the problems that we have faced and we think solved in an acceptable manner, dealing with faulty media, migrating media, and so forth, are not trivial. They're rather painful and can result in either serious loss of data or silent loss of data, which is possibly worse. So what we would like to offer is that knowledge and experience to you in a concrete fashion. So we believe that setting up large digital repositories, of course they must be audited and they must offer standard interfaces and so forth, is something that is definitely feasible and affordable today. We would like to share that knowledge with you, and in fact with anyone else who would be interested, to understand how to go forward, to set up national and international digital repositories. If you start, I think today you probably cannot start below the petascale, that simply would be too small, but you need to understand how you would take that forward, either in width, how you would grow it into larger volume, or in time, which implies the two. So I don't think I will give any more details because there's some of those in my talk tomorrow, other than to say that it is harder than people think. I mean, some people think once you have your data digitally stored, that's the end of the story. But in fact, I would say that's the beginning of the story.
Can I just, because we are not only on the data side, but we are also how much kind of trained manpower and all those kind of things is needed, because you are managing such a large thing. CERN, when we look at it, we only see that, okay, it must be only scientists, okay? But when looking at the data, so just to manage that also, like your organization size and the expertise, and whether that can be...
Thank you, that's a very good point. So we believe there are huge economies of scale in having a limited number of digital repositories. So in the worldwide LHC computing grid, there's close to 200 sites. And if you compare the best with the worst, there's a factor of 10,000 in terms of how good they are at not losing your data or how good they are at losing your data. And that's a very big factor. However, the manpower overhead is somewhat independent of the volume of data. So today we have 100 petabytes. As we grow to an exabyte, 5 exabytes, 10 exabytes, we believe the manpower required will be approximately constant. In addition, as we move forward, we will have additional storage capacity released by the higher density media. So it would be very easy for us or any other WLCG site that offers archival storage to, with time, offer significant volumes of capacity to interested parties at basically the cost of the media. The libraries we have already invested in, the buildings we've already invested in, so it's more or less the media cost. Where we replace the media about every 3 years. We use enterprise drives, enterprise media, because we believe that is what is needed to have the reliability you need for long-term preservation. So in absolute terms, the bit preservation of 100 petabytes takes 1 or 2 people, in addition to what else is needed to provide rapid data access for analysis, which is quite a different problem.
And anything about their technical expertise level? There's a number you told, but technical expertise, whether you have to be basic BTech degree or like that, or even far more than that kind of thing. Anything you could just, because as I know in India, information science up till now, I have never heard any course which is including digital preservation. And the same thing on the computer science, where I am associated, it's just not there. Okay. So in this both relations.
Okay, so we don't use any magic. We just don't trust anything unless we've tested it. And there are, again, big economies of scale. We have a collaboration with many institutes. And so if there's a new file system or new storage device, not everybody has to test it. It can be done, okay, a site can say, yeah, we're very interested, we'll test this. And we can save effort significantly by doing that, because there's an element of trust amongst the sites. So we know that if this site does a test and presents the results, we can trust it sufficiently to store our data in that system. So I think it's this technical trust that has been built up over several decades, the sharing of the information, either through dedicated workshops, conference papers, and so forth, that is a differentiator. So yes, you can go to a commercial provider. I won't name them because in a lot of ways they're all the same. But what is the recourse if they lose your data? They might say, sorry. We don't feel that you know, also on a cost analysis, we don't think they can come anywhere close to what we need.
Thank you. Now I will request Shirley, and I will try to say that in India, mostly there's in-house organization kind of repositories are there, okay? Except the thing which Gautam told this data centers wise, which is a government one. But most of the other organizations are intra-organizational repository, okay? Each one, okay? So your experience of various kind of things, okay? So I just, and in Europe, whether that will survive or it should go towards some sort of a association or some sort of a like that. So anything on that based on your experience and feed. Okay.
As opposed to CERN dealing with big data and dealing with sorry, I should stand closer. My experience is working with smaller archives, community-based archives, as well as domain-specific archives. And in the UK, as opposed to India, from what I heard today, there are lots of e-gov initiative, this sort of government funding, driving organizations, leading them to fulfill mandatory exercise of digitization, the formation of digital archives, and put into place preservation processes. In Britain, we are actually going through, how should I say it, a different scenario. The preservation landscape is slightly different. Coming from the scientific research data environment, repositories are actually thinking of how best to maximize the exploitation of their data. So that they're not totally driven by government, not totally driven by mandatory requirements, but in fact they're actually looking at the customer, looking at this trend of big data analytics, this trend of interoperating and repurposing existing data, this idea of maximizing impact of their holding. But preservation comes with a cost. So how can they possibly overnight turn the existing storage surface and the existing repository services into a long-term data repository? Can they afford the upfront cost, and can they afford this continuous cost without massive investment by government? So instead of thinking about like a huge monolithic purpose-specific long-term data preservation system, they are more looking towards a collaborative approach, this sort of a network of connected, trusted repositories approach. So this is one place where C-DAC is providing a lot of value-added service. So instead, in C-DAC, we are not saying that existing repositories need to abandon what they're doing. Instead, we believe they're doing a very good job doing the bits preservation, and even some of them are doing a good job providing additional materials to help the users to understand the data, to interpret, and in a way help them to integrate data in their research. But they may not be doing it in a sustainable way. For example, BADC recently did BADC, the British Atmospheric Data Center, which is associated with BADC and parts of the National Environment Research Council. They have recently done an audit on the amount of quotation mark representation information, that is the additional metadata that they're managing or that they are referencing to help the users to use their data content. It comes in the thousands. Fancy imagine you have to come up with the efforts, not to consistently manage this object, as well as monitoring to make sure you can respond if something is broke. So to them, it is, I wouldn't say a non-starter, not very realistic. So inside it, we helped them to work together with other similar organizations which also have, for example, LESS-CDF data is quite a common set data for NERC and for the British Geological Survey, as well as in Italy, the seismology government agency, which is called INGV. They're all using kind of similar data, which is derivatives of each other, very similar. So we're looking for scaling up economy of scale. So as opposed to developing monolithic sort of repositories, we are actually thinking about interconnecting each other's information. And as they share their representation information supported by the various C-DAC services to maintain provenance information and authenticity, they are actually opening up the door to facilitate interoperation, integrated access, a common access to their own archived data. I'm not just talking about the representation information, but through accessing the representation information, they can navigate to other data which has some dependency with their own data. An example I can give you is in ESA, European Space Agency, the satellite, they do a lot of massive amount of observation data. They are there are massive amount of data of the same kind of type, same type format. So, and the data only need comparatively. They got the resource to manage all this and to store the bits and also provide representation information. But for smaller organization, they may not be able to. And in Germany, the space agency in Germany, we call DLR, they also use the satellite data from ESA to transform them into derived data. So an example I can give you here and how, through using scientific, through sharing the representation information and using similar infrastructure services, preservation services, and access services, it is possible for DLR to link up the data via the representation information, because in a way, the original satellite data, the raw data, or the L0 and also the the refined L1 data are actually used at the source of the DLR L3 data. So in a way, to understand L3 data, you may need to understand L1 or L0 data. Depends on the type of research you're doing, the type of analysis you're doing. So in a way, using this approach, a collaborative approach supported by common services, it is possible for you to, or for end users to navigate through the structured network of representation information to connect from one type of data to another type of data, and therefore facilitate this big data analytics, this idea of ability to repurpose and reuse existing data. So in a way, to allow smaller repositories to maximize the value, the impact of their data holding without the upfront cost of migrating the system to something else, or to provide a lot of in-house services. So that's the experience of working with smaller repositories and its full economy scale in collaborative services.
Thank you. Evaluation direct. I get evaluated by PSC. PSC says, yes, this is okay. The moment PSC says it's okay, IF says, we accept your result because we have evaluated you. So you know, checker is checking, checkers, checker, checkers, checker, everybody is being checked. So that's how this system operates. And there are CBs, any number of CBs in a country. There may be 150 certification bodies operating in India today. And then there are the organizations. So at the CB level, it is 17021, and then ISO 16919, which I have put in red, the future standard coming in. And at the lowest level is the organization. And if the lowest level standard is same, then that organization can claim international equivalence. I can claim international equivalence because 17011 I am complying with, so is UCAS, so is NAB. Certification body can claim international equivalence because it's compliant. Certification body like UL, if you are American, UL, every American knows UL, I guess. So UL can claim that I am 1721 and therefore I am internationally equivalent. And the organization which is certified, if the standard is common, because at this stage the standards can differ, but 9001 is a common standard worldwide. So if you are certified for 9001 and your certificate bears NABCB logo, you can claim I am internationally equivalent. Because I am coming through a system of evaluation which has been peer evaluated and internationally equivalent. To tell you just a small, in light-hearted manner, a story, I was asked to, not a story, it's a true this thing. I was asked to, by a regulator in India, Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, which was relying on accredited bodies, to get a very good company in India, it's called Engineers India Limited, many of you might be aware, to get into that system. So I said fine, I spoke to Engineers India Limited. And I told him that PNGRB is very keen to have you as an auditing body, but for that you need to go through a process, and we will evaluate you. And this guy on the other side of the phone tells me, Mr. Johri, EIL is known not only in India, but internationally for its competence in oil and gas sector. And you are telling me that you are going to evaluate me? I said, yes, I am sorry, but the world in which I live, everybody gets evaluated. Even I get evaluated for my competence. So as long as you are not evaluated independently, it's a claim that you are making that you are internationally good. So you must undergo an evaluation. So the entire system, as I explained to you, is based on everybody getting evaluated. But somewhere it has to stop. Now you will ask who evaluates IAF. I'm sorry, nobody evaluates IAF. It's like asking who evaluates Prime Minister of India. Well, nobody does. He can evaluate his ministers, but Prime Minister is Prime Minister. Maybe public will throw him out after 5 years. Fine. Or who evaluates President Obama? I don't know who does. So somewhere it has to stop. It stops at IAF, but the entire system is built. Yeah. I won't bore you with the process. We have a certain process in place, which we assess the certification body. We observe their audits. One part of assessment is they are auditing a company and we are observing them whether they are auditing it right. And there are provisions for suspension, surveillance, periodic withdrawal of accreditation, all that. Benefits were obvious. The main reason was international acceptability, and that's what comes through. Today, the accreditation is being used in a lot of free trade negotiations. I am part of myself, free trade negotiations, India with Singapore, India with New Zealand, India with Malaysia, India with the European Commission. Where everywhere we are saying that the product should be certified by an agency which is accredited, etc., etc. So that's how this infrastructure comes. So what you're looking for is certification bodies. Actually, there is one within Department of Information Technology. It's called STQC. It's accredited to 17021 by us. And to me, it would represent the first place I would go to, that you please gear up for auditing of digital repository service providers. But there are a number of, we have accredited 43 certification bodies as per 17021, including UL and including very multinationals like TUVs, DNV, Bureau Veritas, etc., etc. And all of them will look at this as stream of business, and they go on adding streams of business. So the infrastructure in terms of accreditation is here. In terms of certification agencies, potential is here. Rest of it is your responsibility. My part is this one. And this is important. Why I say my part? Because only 2 weeks back, I was with the Commerce Secretary of India, and I was telling him that even if I do my part, which is to get you the world-class accreditation infrastructure, that's what we need, we have. But unless there are certification bodies who are accredited, this doesn't work. And unless there are manufacturers or service providers who follow international standards, this doesn't work. This is one end of the whole infrastructure. We are today facing a problem with one small country called Ecuador. And I told him, Ecuador will not figure in your foreign policy, will not figure in your trade policy. And later on I discovered we don't even have a mission in Ecuador. We have one in Bogota which services 3 countries. But it has put a requirement that it will accept products which come with a certificate of conformity with the accreditation body of the other country, certified by a certification body, accredited by the other country's accreditation body, which is NABCB. But I don't have a certification body accredited, so all the products are held up in India, they can't go. So a small country can put you in trouble if you're not using accreditation wisely. So I have done my part, having an accreditation system which is world class, but there's a whole lot of infrastructure which is needed, which needs to be put in place. That's my final message. Thank you.
Request David, not any specific, but all questions which were raised, okay, and finally also, so it's not only about audit certification, but all earlier questions which were raised, that in this scenario in India, since you are aware of most of the things, so please cover, including expertise, education and training, all those aspects. So that's why I thought.
How long have I got?
You choose.
Okay.
But at least we should release people before 6.
So I can talk as long as I like, but you'll all leave at 6.
No, right. we should leave some time for questions. Okay.
So the question was envisaging a national digital preservation infrastructure for India. And it does seem to me, actually, that India has an enormous number of advantages,
right.
Partly because of the vision of people like yourself and Dinesh and the others in the department who have supported you, but also because of the lack of complications from just history.
Right.
And this, I think, bodes extremely well for digital preservation infrastructure. So, listening to the various speakers, a number of ideas came to me, and I think they fit together quite well, and you can paint a picture, but of course I'm looking at it with a certain bias, but I hope you'll recognize a number of the things that have been said by the other speakers. But one specific thing I think that has not been said is that it does seem to me to be important that we do our utmost to share the effort, because there'll then be economies of scale. And that means that we have to distinguish two things. And the background to this is everybody thinks they're special. And of course they are. So you need to distinguish between those things which are specific to your particular interests. So the audio-visual archives will be different from the libraries, which will be different from the big data repositories or the newspapers, and so forth. But then, very importantly, we need to identify what's common, because that's where the economies of scale, so to speak, will come into play. And I think it's really difficult. I've observed this in Europe, and it is really difficult for organizations to give up the idea that they are completely unique. So so that's a key new idea. And in terms of the economies of scale, we've heard about the possibilities of the cloud, and I'm not sure that there's been a distinction really made between the public and the private clouds, but the new government cloud is an interesting example of something that's not under foreign control, so to speak. And the ideas that were raised about cooperating trusted digital repositories is also interesting, because if you analyze what's out there, you can get into a mindset that we depend on a lot of different things, a lot of different sources of information, and each of those sources of information has to be around for quite a while. So each of those sources has to be a trusted digital repository, as well as the main collection of digital objects that we're interested in. So my particular bias is talking about OEIS and representation information, because that's something else that can be shared extremely widely, because lots of people with documents will need the same representation information, and that's not just a particular piece of software, but all the other information about that particular format. Everybody may use slightly different semantics, and so that's maybe an area that's specific, but the way the semantics is captured is probably general. So one can, if one thinks about things in a fairly logical way, at least so this I'm exposing my biases, then one can begin to make that distinction between what's specific and what's common. So I've mentioned trusted digital repositories, and of course the name of the conference and the last speaker makes it very clear that, again, India's in a very good position to take advantage of this, and I hope that we'll be able to take that further. And one of the important things, I think, that comes out of audits, as we discussed earlier today, is a process of improvement. So if you, at least again, my bias, if you look at the cloud systems or any other of these large systems from the various commercial vendors, what they tend to be is not so much preservation systems, even if you buy a specific thing, they are largely storage systems with a few extra bits and pieces. So Preservica from Tesela does largely transformations between digital objects. Of course, there are then, if we think about Word, for example, that might be easy if you're just looking at it on a screen, but if it's a Word document linked to an Excel document that has a Visual Basic of a certain version in, then it becomes a little more difficult to do transformations for that sort of object. So just thinking about improvements, Shirley was talking about one of the projects I'm deeply involved in, the CDAC project. So CDAC is about infrastructure for preservation, and one of the main drivers there, as has been said, is to identify what can be used to improve repositories. And this is based on the various large surveys we've done, the test audits we've done. There are common, it seems to us, again, I'm biased, so I need to be checked also. Everybody needs to be checked. That there are ways to improve what even a storage system can do. So in general, everybody is doing a pretty good job, but they can all be improved. So the CDAC services are designed to be able to be picked up relatively simply to improve an existing system. So one can imagine beginning with cloud systems, cooperating systems that have a certain level of certification, maybe just at the level of security to begin with, but then improve things in terms of preservation so that one can come into the ISO 16363 sort of certification. And again, the vision that was that Dr. Sinha presented of cooperating trusted digital repositories so that if one fails, it can hand on to another, seems to me to fit nicely into that. So this is not to say that there's a one-size-fits-all, but I think if we analyze things sufficiently carefully, then you can identify the specifics that go into your particular repository versus the commonalities. And one thing that always comes to mind thinking about this is that I worked with people in the performing arts, and I always think about this because essentially people do strange things, especially when they're constrained. So these particular people used sound files everywhere in what they did. But they had another problem. They had to control the configuration of a number of pieces of equipment because they were performing. So what did they do? They used the software that was used to create sound files to put in the configuration data. Now, if you looked at this, you thought, oh, this is a sound file. If you played it, you might hear something, probably some squeaks and whistles. But in fact, the meaning of it was entirely to do with configuring a specific set of hardware and software that they were using. So the more we constrain people, the more strange things they do. The more they embed semantics in software, the more they make their formats containers of other things. PDF is going that way, Word has gone that way. You can put ActiveX components in the new Word formats. You don't know what's there. So what I'm saying is things are complicated, but we can make at least part of what the Indian infrastructure should do simple and cost effective by making the effort to give up our uniqueness and identify the commonalities. I'll stop there if that's okay.
Thank you, David. But now some questions from floor. We have time, so wait for more minutes because the best minds are here in all dimensions. So if any of the things has been left out or not covered properly when looking at infrastructure in Indian scenario, so that's the question. Related questions. Okay. Anybody from, yeah.
I have a question for Mr. David. In your experience, have you come across trusted repositories internationally operated by private enterprise and not by government bodies?
Well, I guess because we have not yet got the ISO 16919 in place, that should be next week or the week after, then in fact in terms of the certification I'm talking about, there are none. There are no public, no private, none, because it's not possible to do that certification. Now, on the other hand, there are other certifications that are out there. I mentioned people doing track certifications. Anybody could pop up and claim to do a certification. It just depends how much trust you then have in that certification process. I think the argument's been made very well that the ISO process, there are enormous numbers of checks to give people, specifically designed to give people confidence. And when that's in place, or when that's behind you, then you'll be in a, I think you'll be well able to trust that sort of certification. So short answer is none yet. I can believe that there would be private organizations certified, partly because certification depends on the agreement of scope. So any organization could agree a scope of certification which it may well fit into, I guess. And but the other side of that is they have to be very clear what that scope was.
Can I ask a supplementary? Even if it is not certified as per a standard, are there private bodies which are doing the service?
Doing what, sorry?
Doing the service of preservation.
Well, yes, I guess I have to answer yes. The question is for how long and against what threats and what level of risk is left. So I'm afraid it's very difficult to give hard and fast answers, yes, no, to those sorts of questions, because a lot of it depends on judgment. I personally take a skeptical view of all claims. Most claims of, so again, I hope this isn't being recorded, but most claims of quality of preservation really are interested in the quality of storage rather than the OAIS type definitions of long-term preservation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Kate Wittenberg of Portico. Certainly I'm biased, I'll admit, but David, I have to say, having gone through the TRAC Council on Research Libraries certification process, it took a year. I had to put half the staff just on creating all of the records and providing all of the data that was required. It was an extraordinarily careful process. We had to answer reams of questions. They came back with revisions. So having been certified by that, I agree it's not what you're talking about, but I would argue in some ways it's even more rigorous because they were looking at not just the technology, but the policies, the legal agreements, the sustainability model that we have with our business partners. They were looking at us as a private not-for-profit that's in there for the very long term.
So as I said, anybody can do a certification against almost anything. It depends on whether you think it's good, and in particular the people who then trust you think it's good. But one, because I know the guys who did the certification, I've read the report. My question, I guess, is when will you do a recertification?
When will they redo it?
Yeah, when will you have it? When will you be recertified?
In next year. We're already gearing up for a recertification.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yep, it's not. It doesn't end. Once you're certified, you have a responsibility to continue to live up to those.
I've been officially warned not to talk in any derogatory manner about that particular certification, so I will not. But I think that the design of the ISO process has a number of very valuable attributes, as has been well described. But it is normally, I think it's true that these sort of certification, these audits, tend to have a visit of a couple of days with a few days on either side of evaluations. Now, it's true that that is not as in-depth as I think you said your audit took 12 months and cost a very, I won't name a figure, but it was an extremely large number, especially even in dollars, never mind rupees, much larger than an ISO audit might be expected to be. And in fact, I will say this, that I did, again, maybe this shouldn't be recorded, but when I talked to the head of Casco, Sean McCurtain, about this, just as a comparison, he almost fell off his chair. So I cannot say anything against what you underwent, but it's just something different. If you're happy and the people who then trust you are happy, I cannot say anything against it. But personally, I put my trust in the ISO process, especially when if you're talking about data and things which are more complicated than documents. So, for example, if you were doing things like the active documents that are coming into play these days, it might be a little more tricky. Because again, I know the people involved. And they're very good people, so please don't set your lawyers on me if you see this video.
Questions? Yeah.
What is the total volume of data which is under the trusted digital repositories as on date today?
So, who is that to?
Anyone?
Oh.
What?
Volume of data. Jamie?
Okay, people are looking at me. We don't have a certified trusted data repository. It's certified to some extent because we have procedures which I invented about service level and loss of data. And if you didn't comply, then you met my big foot, which people didn't like meeting. We have 100 petabytes, and we expect it to grow by about 40 or 50 petabytes for the next 4 or 5 years. Then it will grow by maybe 100 petabytes, then it will grow by 500 petabytes, which is how we get to this 5 exabytes. And somewhere along that route, we will have lots of ISO stamps somewhere.
Anyone more? Okay. So, since it is getting late, so I will not try to summarize anything here. But thank you all for your opinion and advice and suggestions. And also Mr. Johari, I hope that one arm is at present try to be there. So that's the good part. Now over to Dinesh.
So I'll request Dr. Mukul Sinha to please honor the new members who have spoken for the first time during the day. So Dr. Gautam Bose. Mr. Jamie Shears. and Mr. Anil Johari. Yeah, so with this we conclude for today. So I would once again thank all the panelists. Tomorrow morning we will be assembling once again, and the sessions would start at 9:30. The first session is going to be chaired by Dr. Vivek Navle, and we will have the keynote address by Jamie Sears on exascale data preservation in high energy physics. All are eagerly looking forward to it. Thank you very much. So we conclude for the day. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I have a small announcement. We have organized the dinner and cultural program for the invited speakers, paper presenters, and all the chairpersons. There will be some transport arrangement at the gate number 3 of India Habitat Center. Those who have independent arrangement of vehicle, they may please go ahead to the Essex Farms where the dinner is going to be arranged. We have to reach there at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.